My name is Gina. I gave my husband 7 years, over $150,000 out of my own paychecks, and every ounce of patience I had left in me, so that he could become a doctor. What I didn't know was that I was also paying for the exact moment he would decide that I wasn't good enough to keep. He never said it out loud. Men like Andrew never do. He just let the silence do the talking, and let the distance do the leaving. What do you do when you've worked hard, put your husband through medical school, and then he turns around and tells you, without ever saying the words, that you're not good enough for his new life? You don't scream. You don't beg. You do the math. Andrew and I met in middle school. We started dating at 16. Back then, love felt like a plan you could draw on graph paper. We wanted the same things: work hard, go to college, build something together. We were both drawn to medicine, though from different doors. I wanted to be a nurse. My aunt and my cousin were nurses, and I used to watch them walk into a room like they owned the air in it, because they knew, really knew, that they held the weight of someone's survival in their 2 hands, and it didn't make them flinch. Steady hands, no apologies. I wanted that kind of certainty for myself, and I wanted to earn my own money, so no one could ever tell me what I could or couldn't have. Andrew had decided, somewhere around our sophomore year in college, that he wanted to go to medical school. I remember being genuinely happy for him. We'd talked for years about spending our lives together, so his ambition felt like mine too. We agreed, to keep his loans down, to keep us moving forward together, that I would work full-time and put as much as I could toward his tuition and our living expenses. It wasn't a sacrifice in my mind. It was an investment. Our investment. At the time, I was happy to do it. Those years were brutal in a way that doesn't show up in wedding photos. I picked up every extra shift the hospital would give me: nights, doubles, holidays other nurses didn't want, the Christmas Eve shift nobody fought me for. I learned to sleep in 90-minute windows, to eat standing up at the nurse's station, to keep a spare set of scrubs in my car for the nights I didn't make it home before the next shift started. Andrew couldn't work. Medical school ate every hour he had and asked for more. Anatomy at dawn, study groups that ran past midnight, exams that seemed to stack one on top of the next without ever really ending. Some weeks we passed each other in the apartment like housemates on opposite schedules, a note on the counter instead of a conversation, a plate left in the fridge instead of dinner together. We were both running on fumes, but I told myself it was temporary, a tunnel with an end. I kept a running tally in my head: 1 semester down, 2 more to go, then boards, then residency, each milestone a marker I could hold on to when the exhaustion got heavy. We were building something, and you don't complain about the scaffolding. You just keep climbing it, 1 shift at a time, and trust that the building underneath is worth what it's costing you to put it up. We stayed in San Diego for all of it: undergrad, medical school, residency, because it was cheaper and because it was home. Andrew went into emergency medicine, and it suited him the way a good coat suits certain men. He liked the chaos. He liked being a generalist, someone who had to know a little about everything and trust his gut fast. If I'm being fair, Andrew also had a taste for adrenaline, and he liked the fraternity of it. The ER doctors who called each other by nicknames and talked about codes the way other men talk about football games. I drifted, slowly and without planning it, toward oncology. People assume that's the saddest possible corner of a hospital to work in. It isn't. Cancer patients are some of the most hopeful, most spiritual people I've ever cared for. In the middle of the worst crisis of their lives, they get quiet and clear about what actually matters. Not all of them, but enough of them that it changed me. When someone went into remission, the whole floor felt it. Nurses, doctors, the woman who mopped the hallway at 6 a.m. It was a shared education in what a life is actually worth. Those patients taught me more about living than 4 years of college ever did. So in Andrew's last year of his medical residency, I started thinking about going back for my master's degree, a clinical nurse specialist degree, focused on oncology, caring for people with cancer. I loved my work. I just knew I could do more of it, and do it better, with more education behind me. I brought up wanting to go back to school to Andrew one night, over dishes, because that's when we actually talked back then. "I've been looking into a master's program," I said, "for oncology. I think I want to do it." The first thing that crossed his face wasn't interest, it was annoyance, quick and then gone like he'd caught himself. "Now?" he said. "I'm literally about to finish residency, Gina. I haven't even had a chance to start my career as a doctor yet, and you want us to get back on the grind of work and school with me supporting you?" I stood there with a dish towel in my hand, genuinely confused. Supporting me? Andrew, I've been supporting us for 7 years. So now you're throwing that in my face? I'm not throwing it, it's just true. I was in school. It's not like I was sitting around doing nothing. I know that, I said. I was there for every bit of it. I'm just saying, you got the education you wanted. Why can't I get the education I want too, now that you're done with your schooling? He set his fork down, slow and deliberate, like he needed a second to organize his frustration into something that sounded reasonable. It's not that simple. You act like I can just flip a switch and start earning real money the day I finish residency. Attendings still have loans to pay off. I've got to build a practice, figure out where we're even going to be living long term, and now you want me thinking about tuition on top of that? I'm not asking you to think about it alone, I said. I'll still be working. I always have been. I just want to go further, the way you did. It's different for me, he said. I'm becoming a doctor. That's not the same as a master's in nursing. I felt that land somewhere under my ribs, quiet and precise, though I didn't say anything about it yet. Different how? You know what I mean, he said, waving a hand like the answer was obvious and beneath explaining. I'm not trying to be an ass about it. I just think there's a difference between what I built and what you're talking about building. There isn't, though, I said. Not to me. I want to be better at the work I already love. Same as you did. He didn't answer that directly. He just picked his fork back up and said, "Can we not do this tonight?" In the tone of a man closing a door he didn't think he needed to lock, because he assumed I wouldn't try the handle again. We didn't fight exactly. We just stopped, the way two people stop when neither one is willing to lose. In his head, I think, he was already a doctor, and that felt like enough for both of us. His degree standing in for mine, the way a single umbrella is supposed to cover two people if they just stand close enough. But I liked my own independence. I still thought of us as a team. I just didn't want to be the one who was quietly filed away as not pulling her weight. After that conversation, something in the apartment changed temperature. Andrew was already stretched thin with his final year of residency, but he started staying out later with his ER friends, and when he was home, he had a way of watching me that I couldn't quite name at first, assessing me. We'd be in the middle of some ordinary disagreement, politics, some article I'd read, a fact he'd gotten wrong, and I'd feel his jaw tighten like I'd committed some sort of offense just by being right. "You don't have to make everything a debate," he said once, after I'd corrected something he'd said about a study. "I'm not debating, I'm just telling you the actual number." I know what I said. "You said 15%, it's 4. He didn't answer. He just looked at me a beat too long, like I'd embarrassed him in a room that had no one else in it. I tried to bring the CNS program up 2 more times over the following months. Both times he waved it off. Too tired, too much going on, can we talk about this later? Later never came. So I stopped asking him and just kept researching quietly on my own. I wasn't going to let his mood dictate my future. I just stopped including him in it. Then came the dinner party. It was at the house of one of his ER colleagues, Alex, and his wife, Vanessa. Their place was the kind that always smelled like good candles and better wine, the kind of house where doctors gathered to remind each other, without ever saying it outright, that they'd made it. I'd been to a dozen of these, loud laughing, war stories from the pit, somebody always doing an impression of a patient who'd come in with something absurd lodged somewhere it shouldn't be. I didn't think twice about going. I knew most of the wives by name by then, knew which topics kept the table light and which ones didn't. Dinner ran long, the way it always did, plates cleared and wine glasses refilled twice over before anyone moved to the living room. Somewhere in the middle of it, the conversation drifted to diagnostics. Somebody's difficult case that week, a patient who'd been in and out of the ER 3 times before anyone caught what was actually wrong. One of the guys, a resident named Curtis who'd had maybe one glass too many, made an offhand joke about oncology patients just needing more scans thrown at them until something sticks. A couple of the others laughed. Andrew smiled into his glass, not really listening, the way you do at a joke you've heard some version of a dozen times before. It was said lightly, the way ER doctors say almost everything, quick, a little cocky, gone before it could land anywhere serious. But it wasn't quite right, and something in me, maybe the wine, maybe just 7 years of biting my tongue at these dinners, decided it was worth saying so. "That's actually not the right approach," I said, keeping my voice easy, conversational, the same tone I'd use correcting a chart. "In oncology, we're trained to read the whole picture over time. Blood work trends, patient history, how someone's actually responding, because you're managing someone for months or years, not 20 minutes. It's the ER model that leans on scans honestly, because you don't have the luxury of time to know the patient the way we do." It wasn't an attack. It wasn't even close to one. It was just true, spoken plainly, the way you'd correct a fact at any other table without a second thought. But the table went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when someone said something accurate that nobody asked for. Curtis's smile thinned out. Alex glanced at Vanessa. And Andrew? Andrew's face did something I hadn't seen it do in front of other people before, a kind of color rising under his collar, like I'd wandered uninvited into a room that belonged only to him, and pulled out a chair that wasn't mine to touch. It wasn't rude, it wasn't even wrong. It was just true, and it happened to needle at something ER doctors don't love hearing, that speed isn't the same as depth, that ordering the test isn't the same as understanding the disease. The table went quiet for half a second. A couple of Andrew's buddies exchanged a look I wasn't supposed to catch, and I watched Andrew's face do something I'd never seen it do in front of other people. Color, then tighten, like I'd walked into his workplace and pulled a chair out from under him. The whole ride home, he didn't say a word. I didn't either, because I hadn't done anything wrong, and I wasn't going to apologize for it just to make the silence stop. At home, he finally said it. "You embarrassed me tonight." I said something true, Andrew. It's not an insult, it's just a different way of practicing medicine. You should have known better. You've been with me long enough to know how that sounds to them. I didn't know, because it's not how it sounds to my people. What I said is common knowledge among oncology nurses. It's not a controversial opinion, it's just not one your friends like hearing. He shook his head, not even angry exactly, just something colder. "You don't even know what you're talking about." I let that sit in the air a long time before I went to bed. After that night, the distance that had opened up when I first mentioned school got a lot wider, and it felt more permanent. Andrew turned cooler at home in a way I couldn't argue with because he never raised his voice. He just receded. We stopped doing the things that used to be ours. The seafood place on Pacific Beach where we always split the same appetizer, the drives up to Los Angeles for a show, the Sunday mornings hiking Torrey Pines with coffee we didn't finish. Those things just quietly stopped happening, the way a garden stops being watered. No dramatic ending, just less and less until you look up and it's gone. I mentioned again that I was applying to a master's program. His answer this time had an edge to it. "I just want a minute where I can breathe, Gina. I want to actually enjoy being done with school before I'm back to supporting somebody in it." "That's not what this is. But I supported you for 7 years without asking for a minute to breathe. I think it's fair for you to do the same for me now." He didn't answer that one either. That was becoming his signature move. Silence instead of an answer, because silence couldn't be quoted back to him later. For a while I told myself we were just going through a rough patch, the kind every long relationship survives. 2 things changed my mind. The first was the mail. I started noticing envelopes from hospital systems in cities I'd never heard him mention, Chicago mostly. He hadn't said a word to me about looking elsewhere. "Are you thinking about leaving San Diego?" I asked him one night, holding one of the envelopes. "Nothing's certain yet," he said, not looking up from his phone. "That's not what I asked. I asked if you're thinking about it." "I don't tell you every thought I have the second I have it." "This isn't a thought, Andrew. This is a job in another state. You could have mentioned it." He shrugged, and that was the whole conversation. I filed it away, the way you file away a smell of smoke before you found the fire. The second thing happened during an argument that started over something small, dishes, I think, or laundry, and ended somewhere much larger. He said almost offhand that I could stand to make more of an effort, like Vanessa does. Vanessa, Alex's wife, a pediatrician. I stood there holding a laundry basket, and something in me went very still and very clear. Vanessa, I repeated. I'm just saying. Alex's whole life looks put together. You could try a little harder. I didn't yell. I didn't even feel the urge to. I just felt something click into place, quiet and total, like a key finally finding the right lock. All the distance, the annoyance every time I brought up school, the tightening jaw at the dinner party, it wasn't really about the master's degree at all. It was about the story he'd built in his head where he'd earned his way into a certain kind of life, one with a certain kind of wife in it. A doctor, a lawyer, someone with letters after her name to match his. And I didn't fit the picture. And if I stayed a nurse with a bachelor's degree forever, I never would. Understanding that didn't make me smaller. It made me sure. If this was the ground I was standing on, I needed to know it wasn't sand. I applied to 2 more programs that spring, doubling down instead of backing off, though I kept it quiet and local. I didn't know yet what was actually happening in Andrew's head, not the full shape of it, but I knew I wasn't going to let his coldness be the reason I stopped moving forward. His graduation was in June. Small ceremony, one of the nicer conference rooms at the hospital, followed by an awards dinner. I wore the blue dress he'd once told me he liked. I clapped when they called his name. But there was a coldness in him the whole day that had nothing to do with nerves. His eyes would land on me and then slide off, like I was a piece of furniture he'd forgotten to move out before new guests arrived. I noticed. I decided to play the part anyway, just for that one day. I told myself I owed him that much, even if I no longer believed he thought he owed me anything at all. On the drive home, I already knew. More than 10 years teaches you a person's tells the way 10 years of oncology teaches you to read a chart before the doctor walks in. I knew, watching his hands on the wheel, that he was about to either end this or leave. It ended up being both, dressed up as neither. I got the offer in Chicago, he said, eyes on the road. I'm taking it. You already decided. I think the distance might actually be good for us. Reinvigorate things. I just think some space could help. I knew it was a lie before he'd even finished the sentence. Not a lie about Chicago, that part was real, but a lie about the space helping. He wanted an ending without a scene. He wanted the distance to do the breaking up for him, quietly, over months, so that neither of us would ever have to say the actual words. So I gave him exactly what he wanted. I said, okay. He moved out 2 weeks later, took most of his things, left some, the way you leave a light on in a house you don't plan on coming back to, just in case someone's watching from the street. The calls thinned first, daily became weekly, then weekly became monthly. My calls to him went straight to voicemail more often than not. In September, I was accepted into a program with rolling admissions. Start date January. I remember sitting with the acceptance letter in my lap and realizing I hadn't had an actual conversation with my own husband in over a month. I debated whether to even tell him. I decided I would the next time he called. He didn't call until mid-October. I got into a program, I told him. I start in January. There was a pause, and then that testiness I'd started to recognize as his default setting with me. So what, you expect me to pay for that? Things are expensive out here, Gina. I'm just getting on my feet. I thought about every double shift, every holiday I'd worked instead of visited family. 7 years of my life quietly poured into his degree like water into a foundation so that something could be built on top of it, and I realized, sitting there with the phone against my ear, that I wasn't angry. I was clear. I wasn't going to chase his money because I wanted to punish him. I was going to chase it because it was fair. That was the whole of it. Fair. I let him vent for a minute. The money, the cost of living, how hard it was starting out. When he finally ran out of steam, I asked him one question. Andrew, what do you think 7 years of financial support is worth? He sputtered something about it not being that simple, said he had to go, and hung up. I called a lawyer the following week. Her name was Charmaine Thomas, and she had the kind of calm that made you feel like your problem was smaller than you thought, which is exactly what you want in a lawyer. Her office was on the 9th floor of a building downtown, all clean lines and quiet carpet, nothing like the chaos of a hospital, and I remember thinking, sitting in her waiting room, that I hadn't been in a space that quiet in years. You have 2 paths, Charmaine told me, in a conference room with better light than Andrew's graduation venue. She had a legal pad in front of her, but she barely glanced at it. She'd clearly already run the numbers before I sat down. You can file for divorce now, and we pursue this through equitable distribution and spousal support. Courts do consider one spouse's contribution to the other's professional degree, especially over 7 years, especially where you deferred your own education to do it. That's not a small factor. It's documented, it's provable, and judges take it seriously. Or we can send him a demand letter first, lay out the financial reality clearly, tell him what he's actually facing if this goes to court, and give him a chance to resolve it directly. Some men move a lot faster once it's in writing from someone who isn't his wife. What would you do? I asked her. She leaned back, considering it the way you'd consider a diagnosis you'd already half decided on, but wanted to say out loud anyway. I'd send the letter first, she said. Filing is always still available to you. Nothing about sending a letter closes that door, but a letter costs him nothing to read and everything to ignore. Most people who've been avoiding a conversation for months don't want to see it typed up with a case number attached to it. It has a way of making things very real, very fast. I told her to send it. The letter was 3 pages, and it wasn't cruel. It was precise, the way I imagine a good diagnosis is precise. No wasted language, no room for interpretation. It laid out 7 years of income I had contributed toward tuition, board exams, licensing fees, and living expenses, adjusted plainly for what that money represented now, with dates and figures lined up in a column that left nothing to argue with. It noted, in the flat, unbothered language lawyers are so good at, that California courts recognize contributions to a spouse's professional education as a factor in dividing community property and awarding support, particularly where the contributing spouse delayed her own advancement to make it possible. It closed with a simple request, a contribution toward Gina's graduate program in an amount to be discussed, in lieu of proceeding to file. Andrew called me 2 days after he got it. He was angry because he had just realized the ground has shifted under him without his permission. That particular register of anger that's really just fear wearing a louder coat. You're threatening me with a divorce lawyer over grad school? I'm not threatening anything, Andrew. I'm asking you to be fair. You can talk to Charmaine directly if you'd rather not talk to me. This is insane. I make one decision to take a job and suddenly I'm being sued. You're not being sued. You're being asked to pay back in kind part of what I put into your degree, so I'm not the one taking out loans for my education. That's it. There was a long pause on the line, long enough that I could hear the sound of a Chicago apartment behind him, someone's TV a room away. And I remember thinking how strange it was to hear the noise of his new life leaking through the phone like that, evidence of a world I wasn't part of anymore. He tried a few more angles over the following weeks, that I was punishing him, that I was being vindictive, that this wasn't the woman he married. I let all of it pass through me without landing, because none of it was actually about the money, and we both knew it. It was about him having to sit with the fact that fair doesn't stop applying to a person just because it's inconvenient for the person who benefited from it the first time around. I had to keep saying that last part over and over to myself, some nights, like a private mantra, lying awake with my phone dark on the nightstand. Fair does not stop applying, just because it's inconvenient for the person who benefited from it the first time around. It became the sentence I reached for whenever the guilt tried to creep back in, whenever some old, well-trained part of me wanted to apologize for asking. His own lawyer, when he finally hired one, told him roughly what Charmaine had already told me. That 7 years of documented contribution toward a professional degree in a state that recognizes exactly this kind of claim was not a fight he was likely to win cheaply, in court or out of it. Fighting it in front of a judge would cost him more in legal fees and discovery than simply settling ever would, and it would take a lot longer, dragging out through a year he clearly wanted behind him, not ahead of him. He caved in December, not gracefully, and not before he tried one last thing that had nothing to do with money at all. He flew in from Chicago the first week of the month, unannounced except for a text that said, "I'm in town, can we talk in person?" I almost said no. Part of me wanted to, but another part of me, the part that had spent 10 years learning how to read him, wanted to see, up close, what he'd try. He picked the seafood place on Pacific Beach. Our place. I noticed that immediately. He was already seated when I got there, and he stood up when he saw me, pulled my chair out, all the small gestures of a man auditioning for a part he used to play without trying. "You look good," he said. "Andrew!" "I'm serious. Chicago's been good for me. I've been thinking a lot, actually, about us." I didn't say anything. I'd learned that silence worked just as well on him as it had always worked on me. "I miss this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the restaurant, the water beyond the window, 10 years of Friday nights folded into one gesture. "I miss us. Do you even remember what we used to say? That we'd always have each other's backs, that whatever one of us needed, the other one would show up for it." "I remember," I said. "I was there for it. I lived it for 7 years, Andrew, while you were in school." "Exactly," he said, leaning forward like I'd handed him the point he wanted. "That's what I'm saying. We were a team. I thought you loved me enough to know I'm not trying to screw you over here. This lawyer stuff, it feels like you've turned me into some enemy, like I'm not the guy you married." "You're not the guy I married," I said, and I said it gently because it wasn't an accusation, it was just true. The guy I married would have been thrilled when I mentioned grad school. He wouldn't have needed a demand letter to remember how the 7 years of my paychecks contributed to his education. His jaw tightened, the same way it did at that dinner table with his ER friends. "So that's it? 10 years, and this is how it ends? With lawyers?" "You ended it," I said. "In June, in the car. You just didn't use the words because you wanted the exit without the mess. I'm not doing anything to you right now that you didn't already do to me. I'm just asking to be paid back for an investment, the same way you'd expect if the roles were reversed." "I thought you loved me," he said again, quieter this time, like the volume itself might do the convincing his words weren't managing. "I did," I said. "That's exactly why I put 7 years of my life into your degree. But love was never supposed to mean I disappear so you can look good next to Vanessa. And it's a little late to bring up the team we used to be, Andrew, when you're the one who already left it. You don't get to invoke it now, only when it's inconvenient for you to pay your half." He sat back like I'd shoved him, though I hadn't raised my voice at all. "Can we just handle this ourselves?" He tried, one more angle, softer. "Without the lawyer. Without all this formal back and forth. I'll write you a check. We don't need the paperwork, the letters, any of it. Just you and me." "No," I said, and I said it plainly, without any heat in it, because I'd already decided this the day I walked into her office. "The letter stays, the number stays. I'm not doing this on a handshake with a man who forgot 7 years of shifts the second it stopped being convenient to remember them." He didn't say much after that. He paid for the meal, which felt almost funny given everything, and we said goodbye on the sidewalk outside, and I remember thinking, watching him walk to his rental car, that this was probably the last time I'd ever see him try to charm his way out of something. It didn't work. It hadn't worked in years, if I was honest with myself. I'd just been too tired, too deep in the tunnel, to notice how long it had stopped working. There were a few more phone calls after that, each one an attempt to negotiate the number down without sounding like that's what he was doing. "I could do half now, half in the spring," he said during one of them. "Things are just tight right now, Gina. I'm not saying no, I'm saying let's be reasonable." "The letter already lays out what's reasonable, Andrew, that's the number." Come on, can we not turn this into some formal thing? I'll help you out. I just need it to not look like I'm getting steamrolled by a lawyer over grad school. It's not about how it looks, I said. It's about what's fair. You know that number isn't made up. Charmaine didn't invent it. It's 7 years of my paychecks documented right down to the dollar. There was a long silence, the kind he used to fill with charm back when charm still worked on me. It didn't anymore. Fine, he said finally, clipped, like the word cost him something to say. Have your lawyer send the paperwork. I'll sign it. But eventually, in writing, through the lawyers, he agreed to cover the full cost of my program. Not as a favor, not as generosity. As a settlement, a line item, a number with his signature under it, nothing sentimental attached. When the final document came through, there wasn't a single word in it about being sorry, or about the 10 years before it, or about any of what we used to be to each other. Just an amount, a due date, and his name. I read it twice, standing in my kitchen, and felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't expected. Not triumph exactly, quieter than that. Just the plain, solid feeling of a debt finally being called what it always was. I started school that January, exactly on schedule. People sometimes ask if I regret how it ended, whether I wish it had gone differently, whether I hated him for what he did. I don't, not really. I think Andrew wanted a version of success that had a certain kind of woman standing next to it in the photograph, and somewhere along the way, 7 years of my double shifts stopped being visible to him. Not because they didn't happen, but because he'd built a story where his degree was the only thing in the room that counted. I know better than that now, and honestly, I think I always did. I just needed one clean, cold moment, a laundry basket in my hands, his voice saying another woman's name like a measuring stick, to stop doubting what I already knew. I have a good mind. I built a good career out of nothing but shift work and stubbornness. And the 7 years I spent making sure Andrew could become a doctor were not a debt I owed him for the privilege of loving him. They were an investment, exactly like we'd agreed at the start, and an investment is something you're entitled to see returned. He never did intimidate me, not really, not even when his lawyer sent letters back trying to make my ask sound unreasonable. I'd spent years watching him operate in emergency rooms, quick and confident and a little too sure of himself. I'd spent that same amount of time in oncology wards, learning patience, learning how to read a slow-moving truth instead of a fast one. In the end, that was the skill that mattered. Not the one that gets you through a crisis in 20 minutes, the one that lets you sit with something difficult long enough to see it clearly and still be standing there, calm, when it finally resolves the way it always should have. Fair is fair. It just sometimes takes longer to collect than you'd like. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe.